what is it? No, but I mean, like, I think that's some of their ways. I'm sure, well, I don't know what's my minus. But a higher class.
What are we going to do after today? After the study of Exodus? Well, I don't know.
I don't know.
I've been through the new converts study. I've lost track. 3 years, 4 years, I kind of forgot how many times I've been. And I'm not getting any new converts coming in here anymore.
Yeah, but us old converts like the new convert stuff. Because I love the new convert stuff. Right here.
Well, you've already been through this class at least once, I think.
I have, but it doesn't fit brain cells. I only have one left. Yeah.
Boy, that's the caliber of students that I have.
Sorry.
I'm gonna have to want to consult with the elders and with preacher and just see what their ideas are for education for the congregation and where I fit in, if anywhere in the future. But I am thinking that after the first of the year, I might do a Bible talk. The 6-week class that we take. I haven't done that in a long time.
I know.
And and Ann, she's been hounding me. She's been on my back about that. And so that class is also called "What Does God Want from Me?" That's kind of the idea, and it's just a basic first principles class to say, okay, here I am, interested in God, but I don't know whether I know all the preliminaries. I'm not sure if I understand what this, what's the bottom line on this whole Christian thing. And, am I really a Christian? Have I become a Christian? Do I need to become a Christian? Just things like that. So I'm just going to tell you guys, and I'll probably send out a memo to everybody that's on my email list for people that's in, that has been in this class in the past. And anybody would be welcome to come. It would be probably, we'll have to check with Chris and see when he's going to have another Sunday night special going. Try to work this in between that, I would imagine, probably maybe at the building at 5 in the afternoon or something like that. Or it could be some other time. We could just work out when anybody might like to come to us. It could be in the afternoon. If people don't like to drive at night, it could be at my house if there's not too many people that are planning on coming. But so think about whether you think that is something you need or something that someone might need to just study through, to just help you just focus in on where am I and what do I need to do to be right with God. And a hush fell over the
Well, I
Yes, this is the last class on this subject. And so I will not be teaching again until we figure all of this out.
Yeah.
We may not do this anymore. I don't know.
So,
Well, you wouldn't be in here. You've already gone through a year and a half of this study.
To do something like they're talking about, do these studies, like you did this for 9 weeks, when we were just talking about.
Just do special studies.
Yeah, the special study, this 4 weeks is this, and this one's gonna go 6 weeks or whatever, and just do some different studies like that.
Okay.
I think you can do it. Right here, is that good?
no, I mean, for me, the reason I've been hounding you for Bible talk is because when I first took that class, I had just moved here. That was like over 3.5 years ago. And I still have all my notes that I took, and I have questions. It's like the more I learn, the more I have questions, or I want to go back because I'm like, well, what about this? Mike didn't answer that.
What you're talking about, which is good too, I agree with her, I did all those papers too, when he did like, it's just a 7-week prep class, he came to our house and did that. So you're talking about Bible talk, not the one that was the whole year one?
No, this is Bible talk.
You're both-
6 weeks.
Okay, yeah, this is the 6-week one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind doing that, Danny. Just a refresh.
You do such a good job.
And this is just like my meatloaf. People just can't get enough of it.
It's true.
Well, we'll continue to move this over and think about it, but I'll guarantee you this, I will not be into doing anything next week and probably for several weeks after that. I'm just gonna go bask in the luxury of somebody else teaching for a little while. But meanwhile, let's see if this is gonna work. We got Troy on the standby just in case, and it did not work, so. It goes to sleep, it gets lazy, if I'm not using it, it goes to sleep. So this is, go back one. This is our last session, session 9.
That's the guy. Yeah, you're looking to.
So we have been studying and solving the Exodus mystery by Ted Stewart. That is Ted Stewart. It's over there. I don't know, maybe after having sat through these classes, you understand why I thought that book was worthy of putting a class session together. I think it's been very good. As the notes are on the back table. Notes for today. This is lesson 9, and there are a few back lessons in case you're missing anything. You can get some of the sheets there. But as the notes say, I was very impressed by the depth of research displayed by Ted Stewart. I mean, we're talking about a guy. How many books did he write? I would imagine 1. And he wrote about the one thing that he just absolutely engulfed himself in for most of his life. So that didn't work again, Troy. There we go. Dr. Peter C. Pack, former director of the Center for Ancient Studies at the University of Minnesota, he was also impressed. And he said, Stewart has simply sifted through every shred of evidence available in a very careful and exhaustive manner. His book provides the reader with a preponderance of internal or inside evidence, which I find totally convincing, he said. It will be difficult for the professional Egyptologist to dismiss Stewart's conclusions without considering them carefully, but I believe that such careful consideration will lead to yet another revision of the standard chronology of the history of Egypt, and one that brings it into a crisp focus with the history of Israel. So that's what Dr. Pack said. Dr. Shafter, he made these comments. He said, I was amazed that Mr. Stewart's methods are neither contrived nor strained. He does not deny the facts of archaeology, nor lead the readers on such contorted routes that they are left wondering, where in the world did that come? The critic who fails to read the book will be left supposing that the author is just someone trying to prove what he already believes, regardless of what the archaeological facts actually yield. In so doing, the critic will have committed the same error himself and will never discover that Mr. Stewart is both able and happy to prove what he set out to do. So those are just, a couple of copies by, or statements by people who reviewed the book. Now, over the last 8 weeks, we have looked at some 436, or at least some of the 436 synchronisms that are in the book. The synchronism is something that's in the Bible story and in the history of Egypt that tie together. And he's tying them together in the 12th. There were 7 pharaohs of the 12th dynasty, and he was looking at facts that have been discovered and written in highbrow archaeological books, essays, in the libraries of the archaeological guys who do all this kind of stuff. And he pulled this, all of his stuff that we looked at, from people that do deep research in this area. And these are the synchronisms that we have seen. First of all, palace officials attempted an assassination of Amenemhet I. That is a historical fact. Sesostris I, his son, was advised to trust no one, especially people in the palace and people that were close to them, and don't line up anybody to be your advisor or vizier, as I call it. Wait a while. Make sure that you're very, very careful about doing that. That is in a letter from Amenemhet to his son Sesostris. The description of Sesostris I's vizier was found on a column in Heliopolis, and it matches exactly the description of the duties that were given to Joseph in the Bible. The vizier of Sesostris I is recorded to have been in the same places, doing the same things that the Bible says that Joseph was doing and was at. Every other Egyptian dynasty except the 12th dynasty does not match up with the Bible story. There is no other dynasty but the 12th dynasty that lines up with the story of the Bible. The governmental structure of Egypt under Sesostris I lines up with the biblical account of the governmental structure that was advised by Joseph to the Pharaoh that he served. He advised that they have royal commissioners in each of the nomes, or the states, as we would call them, to look after the affairs of Pharaoh. There had not been such a governmental structure up until the time of Sesostris I. And so he's the one that initiated that. The Bible says that Joseph gave him that idea. Grain storage is memorialized. It's not often seen that they show people bringing in grain and storing it up in tombs or other areas where historical things are recorded. But during the reign of Sesostris I, you find it, especially we saw it in the tomb of Governor Numhotep, and people that were bringing in and storing up this grain. The abundance of prosperity during the reign of Sesostris I would have been years 2 through 8, and that would parallel with the biblical story. Also, we find in Egyptian history water storage efforts, which featured the 200-mile-long canal that was called the Joseph Canal. Pretty interesting that they would have called that canal that way back in those days. And then you also see grain distribution scenes in the tombs. This would have been during the years 9 through 15 of Sesostris I. That would fit exactly with the biblical story. And then it's fascinating what happened. I just decided to quit. Why? I guess it's this kind of slide thing. He doesn't want to go.
Right here.
Huh? Yeah,
No?
not going. I don't have slides. So what would you expect after a famine? And you would think that everything would be devastated after a famine, and Egyptian history records that there was a famine, and they were gathering grain, they were distributing grain, but what was it like for this Pharaoh after the famine? Well, he had a huge army of laborers that were helping him to build magnificent structures all over Egypt. Would you think that there'd be a big building project like this? You think they would be scrapping along just trying to survive after a famine, but they seem to flourish after that famine. This Pharaoh, Sesostris I, owned vast herds of cattle after the famine. After the famine. And he was leasing those out to people all through the country. That is in Egyptian history. He owned and received shares from all the land in Egypt. He owned the land. He was leasing the land back out to people after the famine, all except for the land of the priests. That little detail is the same as the little detail that's in the Bible. The priests still owned their land, the Bible says, and so does Egyptian history. Foreigners were given special favor to live in the land of Goshen during the time of Sesostris I. That lines up with the biblical story. Free foreigners worked as herdsmen, miners, soldiers, in people's homes, all kinds of things, during the reign of Sesostris II. Free foreigners, all in the land, working. They're not slaves. They haven't been captured. They're just free people from Canaan who are living in the land. As a matter of fact, the number of free foreigners multiplied enormously during the reigns of Amenemhet II and Sesostris II. So this is a review of all 8 weeks, but we want to just see it all at one time. You know, we've just been going slowly along and looking at the documents, excerpts out of historical books and stuff, showing that all this stuff is what really happened. But now we just want to run through it and just see what all we saw. Okay, so things changed drastically during the reign of Sesostris III. He was distrustful of everybody. He was just kind of a crazy lunatic kind of a guy. He didn't trust foreigners that were living in the land. He didn't trust foreigners in other lands. He didn't even trust his own natural citizens. He stripped the nomarchs, or the governors of all of the nomes. He stripped them of their power and personally controlled all of the government. This is what the Bible says happened after the death of Joseph. There arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And so this would have been the case. Joseph would have died during the reign of Sesostris II. The next Pharaoh, Sesostris III, would not have known Joseph. Let's see. He enslaved the foreigners in the northern territories, used them in construction projects. That's what the Bible says happened. He feared the Anakites who lived in the land of Canaan, and he built fortifications along the eastern border of the land. And he used foreign slaves who made mud bricks to build the store city of Ramses. That's what the Bible says happening. And that's what Sesostris III was doing. All of these practices continued through the reigns of Amenemhet III and Amenemhet IV. The practices that were set up by Sesostris III. In other words, everything is very prosperous and peaceful for everybody, all the way to the end of the reign of Sesostris II. And then from Sesostris III through Amenemhet IV, it's just a downhill plunge as the country just begins to kind of fall apart. At the end of the 12th dynasty, there is just an abrupt disappearance of this pharaoh, Amenemhet IV, and when he was in his 4th year of sole rule, disappeared mysteriously from history. Just disappeared. There is no record of what happened to him, where he went. Neither his pyramid nor his tomb were ever found, because he didn't have a pyramid and he didn't have a tomb. Neither his firstborn son nor any other of his sons reigned after him. Instead, his wife, who was also his sister, became the sole ruler of Egypt in his place. And within 3.5 years, the country fell to the Libyans and Canaanite forces, who saw that they had no army, they could not defend themselves, so they just came in and took over. All of that happened. That's all historical fact of what happened at the end of the reign of Amenemhet IV. And also in the museum, the British Museum, the bust of Amenemhet IV. Be glad when I don't have to say those words anymore. But anyway, it was disfigured in disgrace. You can see that they scratched off his name, they busted off his nose, because he had brought the nation to ruin. So these are all historical facts. And so then you think, well, is there any record of the plagues? Did he write about that? Well, not officially, because the official chronologers or royal chronologers didn't record stuff like this, any negative stuff. But there was one guy, his name was Etur. He was the priest at Heliopolis at this time, at the time of Amenemhet IV. And so he wrote, and this document is called the Etur Papyrus. And he gives a description of the conditions of Egypt at the end of the reign of Amenemhet IV. And he says things that are so, it's just unbelievable. It seems like somebody copied somebody. Did he copy what the Bible said? Did somebody read Etur's Papyrus and then write that into the Bible? Or did he actually witness these plagues and say things like, the river is blood and the fish have all died? He said, the crops are destroyed. He's just looking around. He's just describing what it's like at this time. He says there's no fruit on the trees. There's no leaves that are left on the trees. We read last week about the swarms of locusts, the hailstorms, and all the stuff that was just devastating the crops and the livestock. He said great numbers of livestock had died. There was a plague about the firstborn in each home, and he said brothers are burying brothers everywhere. He said there's no rooms left in the tombs. He said people are putting their loved ones in the ground everywhere, and yet there was no war. There was no description of anybody having come in and sieged the country or been slaughtering people anywhere. He just said people just were dead all over the place. And then he said that the slaves were spoiling the land of its riches. And the Bible talks about how God instructed the Israelites to go and just ask their master for all their gold and silver and precious stuff. And they just said, okay, you go. If you'll just go away, I'd gladly give you anything if you people will leave. And so Epure writes about this. And it's just another one of those steps in the entire history of the 12th dynasty. So, that's the things that we've studied about. Today we want to ask a few questions about this, things you might be wondering about. Why is this an important study? Well, archaeological research has caused skepticism concerning some basic Bible stories. In 1985, archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon boldly rejected the biblical accounts of Israel in Egypt. She rejected the Exodus story and Israelites' conquest of Canaan. She did a lot of study at the site of Jericho, the first city that would have fallen after the Exodus and the Israelites' wanderings in the wilderness, and then they finally come into the land, the land of Canaan. So she said that it was a waste of time to study the Bible history from the time of Abraham to the time of David. She said it's just all messed up. It's just the content, it just doesn't fit into the history, what we're seeing happen in Israel that time. In 1991, there was a biblical archaeological society seminar, and they did this in association with the Smithsonian Institute. They featured 3 eminent archaeologists in a symposium on the rise of ancient Israel. Okay, it's 1991. And all 3 of these eminent archaeologists concurred that Israel's exodus from Egypt and conquest of Canaan, they said, are myths rather than true history. Okay, so we hate to hear stuff like that. Because we believe in the Bible, we believe the Bible story. The story of the Exodus is a key story, not only in Israel's history, but in the teaching of the New Testament as well. Jesus taught that these things happen. The Exodus motif runs all the way through the New Testament as well. Just the idea of a deliverer and an Exodus and from escape from Satan and from sin. That motif runs all through the whole Bible. William Dever, one of the most widely respected senior archaeologists today, was quoted in Biblical Archaeology Review as saying, all archaeologists today reject the Israelite conquest of Canaan as described in the Bible. Well, that's a pretty bold statement to say all, because that isn't true. Not all. There are archaeologists who are seeing that there's problems with this chronology that's going on here. But anyway, this is the reason this is an important study, because somebody, needs to say, hey, here's the facts of what happened in the 12th dynasty. It lines up perfectly with the Bible. So what do you think about that? Somebody needs to say that, and so somebody did say that. Several somebodies, and Ted Stewart is one of them. So we ask the question, why have scholars missed these conclusions that Ted Stewart proposes? So the major problem has to do with the dating of these biblical events. That's really the stumbling block. It's the thing that's holding everybody up. Some biblical scholars date the Exodus in the year 1446 BC. Ted Stewart does. He said that's when it was. And we went through a lesson that showed how he arrived at that date, and it all seems really very straightforward. So some of these scholars think that it was 1446, and they believe that biblical dates are accurately calculated, that is the correct date. And so if you take the biblical date, the date of 1446, and the Egyptian date of 1446, you say, well, then who was the Pharaoh in 1446, according to the way that they date things in Egyptology? That would be Thutmose III would be the Pharaoh according to the way that Egyptian chronology is dated. 1446 would be Thutmose III, not on the name of the board. Other biblical scholars date the Exodus at 1250 BC. These scholars believe that Exodus is historical, that it really happened. It's a historical thing, but that the date is miscalculated. So they changed that date to 1250. And so if the biblical dates are brought in line with Egyptian dates, 1250 for the Exodus, then Ramesses II would be the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And that's what you usually see in all of the movies and stories and all, the authority books. And they said that that's who it was. However, the historical facts surrounding Ramesses II leave no room whatsoever for the events of the Exodus to have occurred at that time. There's just nothing like that was going on there. As opposed to everything like that going on in the 12th dynasty, but not in these other ones. And so they say, well, we have these two choices, and neither one of them work. So therefore, it's just a hit. It just didn't happen. A growing number of scholars reject both Thutmose III and Ramesses II as the Exodus of the Pharaoh, and they classify the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan as a myth. And the problem is all connected with the dating. So we looked at this problem back in the first and second lessons, and we noted that the mainstream scholars have been looking for a 400-year period in which Israel was in Egypt. They're saying, okay, the Bible says they were there for 430 years, so let's look. Is there a 430-year period in any of these dynasties that match up with the story? Was that the case in Thutmose III or around Ramesses II? No. Why are they looking for 400 years? Because Exodus 12, verse 40 says the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. And that's what's in our English Bibles. That quotation there is exactly what is said in the New International Version. There are many other English translations, including the one that I use, that says the same thing. It says that the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. So they go, well, okay, so you look on there, Jacob in Egypt, that would be when the Israelite people came in to the Exodus, that would have been 430 years. But you can't find this 430-year span anywhere. Yet the Bible says it right there. However, if you look in the New Testament, you look in Galatians chapter 3:16, Paul says the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. The law, introduced 430 years later, does not set aside the covenant previously established. So Paul says that the law, which would have been the same year as the Exodus, right? They left out of Egypt. They went into the desert. God gave them the law. Simon, same year. So the Exodus, he says, was 430 years after the promises spoken to Abraham. Paul says that there was the call of Abraham, then the Exodus 430 years later. The sojourn of Israel in Egypt wasn't 430 years. It was from the call of Abraham until the Exodus. That's what Paul says. Now we have the Bible contradicting itself here, at least in the English translation. And the problem seems to be with Exodus 12, verse 40. And so when we were studying this, we looked at that passage and we looked at the construction, the Hebrew construction, and what it actually says, and how it is not accurately translated over. And get everybody using that same translation. The Jewish historian Josephus he correlated this 430 years from Abraham to the Exodus, the same way that Paul did it. And he said that there was a 200 and something year period of time that they were actually in the country. So Josephus seems to collaborate with Paul on that. And also we looked at like 7 or 8 different excerpts from lots of different places. But one of the ones we looked at was the Septuagint version of Exodus 12:40, which says, "The sojourning of the sons of Israel in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan was 430 years." So the period of time that they sojourned in Egypt, plus the time that they sojourned in Canaan, that was 430 years, not just the sojourn in Egypt. So we needed to be looking for a shorter period of time. And as we studied in those first 2 lessons, you know, the ones that you hated, ones with all the math, and calculators and stuff like that, figuring it all out. Well, the conclusion was that it was 210 years from the time that Jacob came in until the Exodus. That's the time period we should be looking at. So, okay, so we just ask it again. Why scholars overlook the biblical significance of the 12th dynasty? When Ted Stewart seems to have found everything right there, why have they overlooked that? Well, current accepted dates for the 12th dynasty are off by more than 300 years, 360 years. The current accepted dates for the end, let me just say it the way that it's here so I don't get myself messed up. Accepted dates for the end of the 12th dynasty, they said would have been 1806. That would have been the end of the 12th dynasty. But Ted Stewart and other other students of Egypt, including our video, which I have them on the back table back there, also dated in 1446 BC. 360 years off. However, the last third of Stewart's book is packed with astronomical evidence which supports his dating of Israelite Exodus. 1446. He said, "Let me show you how I come up with that. And you will be thankful that our class didn't cover the last 1/3 of Stewart's book. If you would like to read about astrological history and when eclipses took place and when the different planets were in different places and how that all of that was recorded by the Babylonians and by the Assyrians and by the Egyptians and all that kind of stuff. If you want to read all that, get the book. You can read the last third of the book. I read the last third of the book, and what I have to report to you is the last 1/3 of Stewart's book is packed with astronomical evidence that supports his date of 1446. He said, "I know this is the right date. It is here. It is correct." And yet, the history, the accepted dating for Egyptian history says that the end of Amenemhet's reign was 1806. Our companion video, Patterns of Evidence the Exodus, was made by Tim Mahoney, and it points out the lengthy dark period. This is new material here. I haven't said this before in any class, but it's right here at the last of the last page. It points out the lengthy dark periods of history between the Old and Middle Kingdoms, between the Middle and New Kingdoms, and the especially long dark period after the New Kingdom. These dark periods here. So here's the Old Kingdom, and this is where they built a gigantic pyramids, the three big pyramids, the great pyramids would have been way, way, way back, old kingdom. And then there's this dark history. They don't know. They don't know what was really happening at that time. They don't know how long that period was. But they know that at some point they began to pick up again with new archaeological finds that they have in the Middle Kingdom. And the 12th dynasty is during that kingdom. And then after that, there was another dark period. We don't have anything to look at. We don't know how long this period is or what was happening. But then all of a sudden they start finding other stuff in what they call the New Kingdom. And after the New Kingdom, there was another long, dark period. You think that they just went in and found a library somewhere and there was all this stuff. Hey, you know exactly what happened. No, there's thousands of years of history of Egypt. And they get little bits and pieces. As the video said, one of the foremost archaeologists from years gone by had figured out all this hieroglyphic alphabet. He said, what we have is shreds and tatters. We have shreds and tatters of history. And so some areas we have really good stuff. We can kind of piece it together very well. Like this 12th dynasty, for instance. Scott.
For the past, I'd say 10 years, I've kind of been working on this way of approaching this kind of studying. I mean, and really from a personal standpoint, you know, like this guy took it upon himself. He was fascinated whether he did it his way. When you look at the professionals, we used to say that the letters PhD stood for piled higher and deeper. Because, these people really immerse themselves in these things.
Malcolm?
Sorry. But one of my professors said, never try to be an expert on more than 10 years of history in any area, because there's so much stuff. And a lot of these are human beings, and one of the toughest things in dealing with history, especially when you're dealing with religion, is keeping your personal attitudes out of it, being totally, fair, I guess, or trying to stay professional or on the subject. And it's really hard to do that. Like, for instance, the guy who said, all archaeologists now say, it's hard not to assume that these people are looking for a reason not to believe the religious side. Maybe they're not. It's, but it really is up to the individual. If you're really interested, if this affects your faith, get into it yourself. Don't let somebody else, take away your faith.
Yeah, the guy in the video, he said that as he interviewed people that were thinking the way that we're thinking here, as opposed to the others, he said, archaeologists years ago discovered things, and they started dating stuff, and then that was accepted and passed on. That was accepted and passed on. They do change things slightly, but it just almost seems inconceivable that they could go back and change something by 300 years. Mm-hmm. And yet that's what the scholars that Tim Mahoney talked to, they said these dark periods, they really don't need to be as long as they are, probably. See, it affects the history of many other countries around because they're trying to keep the history of Nubia and Greece and Syria and Phoenicia and all these. They're trying to keep them in line with the dating of Egypt. And so they're having to put gaps in the histories of these other countries so that they'll line up with the history of Egypt. And this was also true of Ted Stewart's dating for the 12th dynasty, BT. I call that biblical times. The 12th century biblical times doesn't line up. And he said that these scholars say, but if you were to shorten, especially that last a last long, dark period. Shorten those. We don't know how long they are anyway. We don't know what was going on then anyway. If you shorten those things and slide the history forward, then all of a sudden you have the 12th dynasty Egyptian time lining up with the Egyptian period time. And so there's a lot of talk going on about that right. It's being suggested that they do that. It's being rejected over and over again. But these scholars that we've been quoting from, especially Dr. He says in these last quotes, and we don't have time to read, that's the last one. He said, it looks like more and more people are looking at changing the dating of Egyptian history. It's going to take a long time because it is so ensconced. But one of these days, like always, the Bible always comes out to be true, and other people eventually lines up. This is how we mean here. So anyway, I know when I'm being told, your class is also. So we'll keep you guys in touch as to what we're going to do in the future, but we probably need you next week.